One summer night in 1947, something crashed in the desert near Roswell, New Mexico, an event that would spark decades of mystery, debate, and outright obsession. Witnesses described a blinding light streaking across the sky, followed by a thunderous impact that shook the ground. Then came the military, swift, secretive, and determined to control the narrative. Within hours, officials announced they'd recovered a flying disc, only to retract the statement a day later, claiming it was just a weather balloon. But the people of Roswell knew what they'd seen. Ranchers spoke of strange, metallic debris scattered across the field's materials, unlike anything they'd ever encountered. And then there were the whispers of bodies recovered from the wreckage, not human, not from this world. So what really happened in Roswell? Was it a top-secret military experiment gone wrong, a genuine encounter with something otherworldly, or simply a case of mass confusion, blown out of proportion by time and speculation? The truth is, even now, more than 70 years later, we're still piecing together the fragments of this puzzle. The U.S. government has released reports, declassified documents, even held press conferences to explain it all away. But the questions only multiply. Why the initial cover-up? Why the conflicting testimonies from credible witnesses, military personnel, scientists, even local law enforcement? And why does Roswell remain the most infamous UFO incident in history? A name that instantly conjures images of conspiracy and extraterrestrial contact. This is a story that refuses to stay buried. It's a collision of cold, hard facts and tantalizing gaps in the official record. A tale that forces us to ask, if the truth about Roswell is out there, why has it been so hard to find? Over the course of this video, we'll dive deep into the original eyewitness accounts, the military's ever-shifting explanations, and the enduring theories that keep this mystery alive. We'll separate fact from folklore, scrutinize the evidence, and explore why Roswell isn't just a relic of the past. It's a window into humanity's fascination with the unknown. Because whether you're a skeptic or a believer, one thing's for certain: what happened in that New Mexico desert was anything but ordinary, and the answers, if they exist, might just change how we see our place in the universe. The first person to stumble upon the wreckage was a quiet, hard-working rancher named Mac Brazel. It was a scorching June morning in 1947 when he rode out to check on his sheep after a night of unusually violent storms. What he found wasn't just downed fences or scattered livestock, it was something far stranger. Strewn across a stretch of his land were jagged pieces of wreckage unlike anything he'd ever seen. Some fragments were paper-thin yet impossibly strong, resisting his attempts to bend or break them. Others bore strange symbols, almost like writing, but unlike any language he recognized. The material itself was bizarre, a metallic-looking substance that felt oddly light, almost weightless in his hands, and then there were the odd beams, some covered in what seemed like hieroglyphic markings, that snapped back into place when he tried to warp them. At first, Brazel didn't know what to make of it. This wasn't airplane debris, at least, no plane he'd ever heard of. The military had a base nearby, sure, but nothing about this wreckage matched the familiar machinery of the time. Curiosity soon turned to unease. Neighbors whispered about the fiery object they'd seen streaking across the sky that stormy night. Some even joked about Martians. Brazel, a practical man, wasn't one for wild speculation, but even he couldn't shake the feeling that this was something beyond the ordinary. After days of wrestling with it, he finally bundled up a few pieces and drove into Roswell to report his find to the local sheriff. That decision would change everything. The sheriff, equally baffled, contacted the nearby Roswell Army airfield. Within hours, military personnel swarmed Brazel's property. They cordoned off the area, collected every last fragment, and according to some accounts, sternly instructed the rancher to keep quiet about what he'd seen. But whispers travel fast in a small town. By the time the military issued its first press release claiming they'd recovered a flying disc, Roswell was already buzzing with theories. Brazel himself would later give conflicting statements, first describing the debris in vivid detail, then downplaying it under mysterious circumstances. What made him change his story? Pressure, fear, or something he couldn't or wouldn't disclose? the materials Brazel found that day remain at the heart of the Roswell mystery. Decades later, scientists and skeptics still debate their origin. Some insist they were part of a secret military project, perhaps surveillance devices from high-altitude balloon experiments. Others point to the lack of any documented technology from that era matching the descriptions of the wreckage, its otherworldly lightness, its uncanny durability. And then there are those who ask the unsettling question, if it was just a weather balloon, why the heavy-handed secrecy? Why the swift retrieval, the hushed testimonies, the abrupt shifts in the official narrative? The answers, like the debris itself, seem to slip through our fingers the harder we try to grasp them. The military's response to the Roswell incident was as swift as it was contradictory. Within hours of Mac Brazel alerting authorities, personnel from the Roswell Army Airfield descended on his property, not with casual curiosity, but with the precision of a well-rehearsed operation. Soldiers scoured the debris field, collecting every fragment, no matter how small. Witnesses later described their demeanor as unusually tense, some even claiming armed guards prevented locals from getting too close. Then came the bombshell. On July 8, 1947, the base's public information officer, Lieutenant Walter Haut, issued a press release that would ignite a firestorm. Headlines blared that the military had recovered a flying disc, a phrase that sent shockwaves through the nation. For one brief, electrifying moment, it seemed the government had confirmed the unthinkable. We were not alone. But the celebration or panic was short-lived. Less than 24 hours later, a new narrative emerged. Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force in Fort Worth, Texas, held a press conference beside what he claimed was the real wreckage, a flimsy, foil and balsa wood weather balloon from a top-secret project called Mogul. The original, flying disc story, he insisted, was simply a case of mistaken identity, yet this explanation raised more questions than it answered. Why the sudden reversal? Why had local officers been so confident in their initial assessment, only to be overruled so dramatically? And why did the debris displayed by Ramey look nothing like the strange, durable materials Brazel and others had described? The discrepancies didn't end there. Over the years, military personnel who'd been at Roswell that summer began coming forward with conflicting accounts. Some, like Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who first examined the wreckage, insisted until his dying day that the material was extraterrestrial. It wasn't anything from this Earth, he famously told reporters decades later. Others, like Sheridan Cavett, the counterintelligence officer who accompanied Marcel to the ranch, dismissed it as mundane balloon fragments. Even the weather balloon story itself began to unravel. Project Mogul, declassified decades later, was indeed real, a classified effort to detect Soviet atomic tests using high-altitude balloons, but the timing and location didn't quite match the Roswell debris field. What's most telling, though, is how the military's handling of the incident fueled public suspicion. The initial press release, then its abrupt retraction, the conflicting testimonies from personnel of varying ranks, the disappearance of key documents, each layer added to the impression of a cover-up. Even the language used shifted over time. Early military memos referred to the recovery as a highly classified matter, while later reports downplayed it as a routine balloon recovery. This pattern of inconsistency became the Roswell incident's defining trait. Whether by accident or design, the military's response didn't just fail to quell speculation, it poured gasoline on the fire of conspiracy theories that still burn today. Perhaps the most haunting question isn't about what crashed, but why the response felt so orchestrated. If it was truly just a weather balloon, why the initial claim of a flying disc? Why the armed guards, the secrecy oaths, the decades of shifting stories? The military's own actions turned Roswell from a local curiosity into a global phenomenon, leaving us to wonder, were they clumsily hiding the truth, or expertly distracting us from something even bigger? The official explanation for the Roswell debris hinges on a top-secret Cold War program called Project Mogul, a series of high-altitude balloons designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests by monitoring sound waves in the upper atmosphere. Declassified documents confirm Mogul was real, and its balloons did carry unusual equipment, clusters of radar reflectors, microphones, and odd-shaped components that could explain some of the bizarre descriptions from witnesses. Skeptics argue this fits neatly with the military's revised story, that what crashed was simply a classified balloon, misidentified in the chaos of the moment. Even the timing aligns. Records show a Mogul flight designated Flight 4 went missing around the same period in early July 1947. Yet the devil is in the details. While Mogul provides a plausible framework, the specifics don't quite add up. The materials described by Mac Brazel and others lightweight yet indestructible metal, beams with unearthly symbols, bear little resemblance to the rubber, foil, and balsa wood used in Mogul's balloon trains. Even more telling, the military's own personnel seemed unconvinced. Major Jesse Marcel, who handled the debris firsthand, later insisted what he saw was not of this earth, a far cry from the flimsy wreckage General Ramey displayed to the press. And then there's the matter of secrecy. If Mogul was merely a surveillance tool, why the extreme measures to silence witnesses? Why confiscate every scrap of debris, even threaten civilians with legal repercussions for speaking out? The Cold War context offers clues. In 1947, tensions with the Soviet Union were at a boiling point. The U.S. was desperate to maintain any technological edge, and Mogul's true purpose, eavesdropping on atomic tests, wasn't something the military wanted advertised. A rogue balloon crashing on civilian land risked exposing the program, potentially tipping off the Soviets. This explains the initial cover-up, but not the military's baffling decision to first announce a flying disc only to retract it days later. If secrecy was the goal, why create a spectacle at all? Unless, of course, the debris was so unusual that even trained personnel initially believed it was something extraordinary. The inconsistencies multiply when examining later government reports. In the 1990s, the Air Force released 2 separate investigations into Roswell, first attributing the crash to Mogul, then later suggesting witness accounts of alien bodies were actually misremembered sightings of crash test dummies from unrelated experiments in the 1950s. These shifting explanations only deepened public skepticism. If the truth was as simple as a balloon, why did the official story keep changing decades after the Cold War ended? What emerges is a paradox. Project Mogul is both the most credible explanation and a frustratingly incomplete one. It accounts for the military's secrecy, but fails to explain the first-hand accounts of otherworldly materials. It justifies the cover-up, yet doesn't clarify why some officers involved seemed genuinely convinced they'd encountered something unprecedented. Perhaps the most compelling theory isn't that Mogul was a lie, but that it became a convenient shield, a way to bury something far more sensitive under the guise of national security. After all, in the shadowy world of classified programs, sometimes the best way to hide the truth is to wrap it in a half-truth and let the public's imagination do the rest. Among the most compelling voices in the Roswell saga are those who handled the wreckage firsthand, people like Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer stationed at Roswell Army Airfield. A seasoned military man with a background in physics, Marcel was no stranger to classified projects. Yet what he encountered in that desert left him visibly shaken. Years later, his son, Jesse Marcel Jr., would recount how his father brought home pieces of the debris that night, spreading them across the kitchen table. The younger Marcel, just a boy at the time, vividly remembered the strange symbols etched into the metallic fragments glyphs that resembled nothing from human history. Even decades after the incident, the elder Marcel stood by his account, telling interviewers, "It wasn't anything made by us. I've seen rockets, balloons, every kind of aircraft." This was different. Then there was Grady Barnett, a civil engineer who claimed to have stumbled upon a second crash site closer to Socorro, New Mexico, a scene far more gruesome than Brazel's debris field. According to Barnett, he and a group of archaeology students discovered a silver, disc-shaped craft embedded in the sand. Nearby lay small, lifeless bodies with oversized heads and slender limbs. Before they could examine further, military personnel arrived, cordoning off the area and ordering them to leave under threat of prosecution. Barnett's account, though dismissed by skeptics, mirrors other testimonies from those who swore they saw bodies recovered that summarized descriptions eerily consistent with what would later become the stereotypical gray alien archetype. Equally haunting are the stories of nurses stationed at the Roswell Base Hospital, some of whom allegedly treated injured survivors before being transferred abruptly or sworn to secrecy. One such account comes from a woman named Miriam Bush, who reportedly confided in family members about assisting with autopsies on non-human cadavers. Her sudden death shortly after sharing these details, officially ruled a suicide, only deepened the mystery. These testimonies, often shared reluctantly decades later, carry a raw emotional weight. Many witnesses spoke of sleepless nights, of careers derailed by their insistence on telling the truth, of the crushing pressure to conform to the official narrative. What makes these accounts so unsettling isn't just their consistency, it's the credibility of those telling them. These weren't fringe figures seeking attention. They were military officers, engineers, medical professionals. People trained to observe, to analyze, to keep cool under pressure. Yet their descriptions of the wreckage, its uncanny lightness, its ability to remember its shape when folded, defied every known material science of the era. Even more telling is how their stories evolved over time. Some, like Marcel, refused to back down despite ridicule. Others, like Brazel, seemed to retreat into silence, their later interviews marked by hesitation and vague answers. That tension between what was seen and what could be said lies at the heart of Roswell's enduring power. It's not just a story about strange debris or even potential extraterrestrials. It's about what happens when ordinary people collide with something so extraordinary that it reshapes their understanding of reality, and the lengths institutions will go to keep that reality hidden. The emotional toll on these witnesses can't be overstated. Many spent years torn between the need to unburden themselves and the fear of consequences. Some, like Lieutenant Walter Haut, the public information officer who issued the original flying disc press release, left signed affidavits to be opened only after their deaths, as if freeing themselves from a lifetime of secrecy required the finality of the grave. These weren't the actions of people fabricating tales for fame. They were the desperate gestures of individuals who'd carried a weight too heavy for decades, who needed someone, someday, to know what really happened in the New Mexico desert that summer. And that, perhaps, is the most human element of the Roswell story. Not the question of aliens, but the undeniable truth that those who witnessed it believed, deeply and irrevocably, that they'd touched something beyond this world. In 1995, a grainy black and white film sent shockwaves through the world, purporting to show the autopsy of an extraterrestrial being recovered from the Roswell crash. The footage, released by a British entrepreneur named Ray Santilli, depicted doctors in old-fashioned hazmat suits examining a small, humanoid corpse with an oversized head, almond-shaped eyes, and strangely elongated limbs. The creature's chest appeared to have been cut open, revealing internal organs that looked vaguely familiar yet disturbingly alien. Almost immediately, the film became a cultural phenomenon, airing on television networks globally and fueling endless debates. Was this the smoking gun that proved Roswell was an alien encounter, or an elaborate hoax capitalizing on decades of speculation? Santilli's story only deepened the intrigue. He claimed the footage came from a retired military cameraman who'd filmed the autopsy in 1947, but kept the reels hidden for decades. According to Santilli, the original film had degraded, forcing him to recreate portions while preserving the authentic segments. This admission raised eyebrows: how much was real, and how much was staged. Experts quickly dissected the footage frame by frame. Forensic pathologists pointed out anatomical inconsistencies, like the creature's lack of a discernible neck or the odd way its limbs moved under the examiner's tools. Special effects artists noted the latex-like texture of the skin and the unrealistic flow of the fake blood. Even the surgical tools and gloves appeared anachronistic, more fitting a 1950s sci-fi film than a classified military operation. Yet despite the mounting evidence of fabrication, the film struck a chord. Part of its power lay in timing. The mid-90s were a golden age for UFO mania, with shows like The X-Files dominating pop culture. The autopsy footage tapped into a collective hunger for hidden truths, offering a visceral, seemingly tangible piece of the Roswell puzzle. It also played on the public's growing distrust of government secrecy. If authorities had lied about the weather balloon, why not this? The film's gritty, documentary-style aesthetic lent it an air of authenticity, mimicking the cold, clinical tone of real medical footage. It felt too real to dismiss outright, even as skepticism grew. The truth, when it finally came, was both mundane and fascinating. In 2006, Santilli admitted the film was entirely recreated, though he still insisted it was based on real footage he'd once seen. The original, he claimed, had deteriorated beyond repair. Behind the scenes, the alien was revealed to be a rubber dummy stuffed with animal organs, crafted by special effects artists who'd worked on major Hollywood films. The doctors were actors, the autopsy room a London studio, yet even as a proven hoax, the film's legacy endures. It remains a masterclass in how easily myth can be dressed as fact, how our desire to believe can override logic. What makes the alien autopsy controversy so compelling isn't just the question of its authenticity, it's what the frenzy around it reveals about us. The footage became a Rorschach test. Believers saw confirmation, skeptics saw deception, and Roswell, once a local oddity, became a mirror reflecting humanity's deepest hopes and fears. Are we alone? What might be out there, and if something truly unimaginable crashed in the desert that night, who gets to decide when, or if we're ready to know? The autopsy film, fake or not, forced those questions into the open. And that, perhaps, is why it still haunts us decades later. Not because it answered anything, but because it dared us to keep asking. The U.S. government's handling of Roswell has been a masterclass in controlled disclosure. Slow, calculated releases of information that often raise more questions than they answer. Decades after the incident, thanks to the Freedom of Information Act, thousands of pages of documents have surfaced, offering glimpses into what officials knew and when they knew it. But these papers don't land on researchers' desks with a neat bow. They arrive heavily redacted, with entire paragraphs blacked out, classified stamps obscuring critical details, and dates that don't quite align with official timelines. The most revealing of these releases came in the 1990s, when the Air Force published not one but two exhaustive reports on Roswell. The first, in 1994, finally acknowledged the cover-up, but not the one UFO enthusiasts expected. It confirmed the debris was indeed part of a classified project, but not extraterrestrial. Project Mogul, the high-altitude surveillance balloon array designed to spy on Soviet nuclear tests. The second report, released in 1997, tackled the even thornier issue of the so-called alien bodies, described by witnesses. Here, the Air Force offered a startling explanation. What people remembered as otherworldly beings were actually anthropomorphic test dummies, dropped from balloons in the 1950s as part of parachute experiments. Problem is, those dummy drops happened years after Roswell, a discrepancy the report brushed off as faulty memory on the part of aging witnesses. That explanation left many scratching their heads. Why would credible individuals, military personnel, doctors, engineers misremember events by nearly a decade? And why did their accounts of small, fragile bodies match so closely with descriptions that wouldn't enter popular culture until much later? The contradictions don't end there. FOIA requests have uncovered memos from the period marked Eyes Only, referencing the recovery of unknown objects and non-human entities. One particularly eerie document, a 1947 FBI teletype, describes the discovery of a flying disc with terminology so matter-of-fact it's chilling. The disc is hexagonal in shape and was suspended from a balloon by cable. But here's the catch: the very next line, where the object's origin might be clarified, is conspicuously missing, severed by a razor blade or redaction ink. This pattern of near revelation followed by abrupt obfuscation fuels the skepticism. If the truth was as mundane as dummies and balloons, why the heavy-handed secrecy 70 years later? Why are certain files still classified as top secret Majestic, a code name tied to rumored UFO investigation programs? Perhaps the most telling clue lies in what hasn't been released. Researchers have identified gaps in the paper trail, missing weeks of communication from Roswell Army Airfield in July 1947, unexplained disappearances of key personnel's service records, and the complete absence of Project Mogul's flight logs for the critical period. Even the Air Force's own reports admit they can't locate crucial files, blaming routine destruction of outdated documents, but in the world of government secrecy, absence speaks as loudly as presence. The deliberate erasures suggest not just bureaucratic incompetence, but a systematic effort to sanitize history. What emerges is a paradox. On one hand, the FOIA releases confirm the military lied repeatedly about Roswell. On the other, they insist the lie was purely about Cold War espionage, not aliens. Yet the gaps in the record, the stubborn refusal to declassify certain files, and the sheer persistence of credible whistleblowers keep the door open. If the full truth is buried, it's not in a desert ranch, but in a vault somewhere, one that's still locked, still guarded, and still begging the question. After all this time, what could possibly be left to hide? The Air Force's 1994 and 1997 reports on Roswell were supposed to put the mystery to rest. Official, exhaustively researched documents declaring the case closed. But for many, they did the opposite. These reports, rather than silencing debate, became flashpoints for scrutiny, dissected line by line for what they revealed, what they ignored, and what they couldn't or wouldn't explain. The 1994 report marked a turning point. For the first time, the military admitted they'd lied about Roswell, but not in the way UFO researchers had hoped. The flying disc story, they claimed, was a hasty misidentification not of an alien craft, but of a top-secret Mogul balloon array. Buried in the report's dry, technical language was a startling admission. The original weather balloon explanation had been a cover story, hastily concocted to hide Cold War espionage efforts. This revelation was groundbreaking, yet it raised a glaring question. Why had it taken nearly 50 years to acknowledge even this much? If Mogul was the full truth, why the decades of silence? Then came the 1997 report, tackling the most explosive aspect of the Roswell lore, the bodies. Witnesses had described small, non-human corpses recovered from the crash site accounts that became the backbone of extraterrestrial theories. The Air Force's rebuttal was as bold as it was controversial. Those aliens, they argued, were actually parachute test dummies dropped from high-altitude experiments in the 1950s, misremembered by witnesses who'd conflated events years apart. On paper, it sounded plausible, but the timeline didn't hold up. The dummy tests, codenamed Project High Dive, began in 1953, 6 years after Roswell. How could locals confuse an event from the late 40s with one from the mid-50s? The report's explanation that memories had blurred over time felt flimsy, especially when applied to trained military personnel who documented their experiences in real time. Even more troubling were the omissions. Both reports conspicuously avoided addressing key testimonies. Major Jesse Marcel's detailed accounts of unearthly debris were dismissed without analysis. Grady Barnett's description of a second crash site near Socorro went unmentioned, and the nurses who allegedly treated injured beings. Their stories were brushed aside as hearsay. The Air Force's selective engagement with evidence gave the impression not of thorough investigation, but of damage control, poking holes in the weakest claims while sidestepping the most credible ones. The reports also left glaring logistical questions unanswered. If the debris was from Mogul, why didn't the military simply say so in 1947, once the balloons were no longer classified? Why the initial flying disc announcement, only to retract it days later? And why, if this was all a simple case of mistaken identity, were witnesses like Mac Brazel detained and allegedly threatened into silence? The documents offered no insight into these contradictions, leaving readers to wonder whether the real cover-up wasn't about balloons or aliens, but about the military's own chaotic handling of the incident. Perhaps the most telling flaw in the Air Force's closure of the case was its reliance on Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually correct. But Roswell has never been a simple story. It's a tangle of Cold War secrecy, shifting narratives, and human psychology. The report's tidy conclusions felt out of step with the messy reality of the incident, ignoring the emotional weight of first-hand accounts in favor of bureaucratic certainty. In the end, what the Air Force called case closed felt less like resolution and more like another layer of the mystery, one that, for many, only deepened the suspicion that the full truth still lies buried, waiting for someone with the right clearance to finally set it free. Roswell didn't just vanish into the desert dust, it exploded into the collective imagination, becoming the beating heart of UFO mythology. What began as a local mystery in 1947 soon rippled outward, morphing into a cultural touchstone that reshaped how we envision extraterrestrial life, government secrecy, and humanity's place in the cosmos. By the time the 50s rolled around, Roswell had already cemented its legacy, fueling a wave of sci-fi pulp novels and B-movies featuring bug-eyed aliens and crashed saucers. But it wasn't until the late 70s and 80s, when researchers like Stanton Friedman and Charles Berlitz revived the case, that Roswell truly became synonymous with the idea of a cosmic cover-up. Their books, packed with declassified documents and first-hand testimonies, transformed the incident from folklore into a full-blown conspiracy theory, one that resonated with a public increasingly skeptical of authority. Hollywood quickly seized on Roswell's allure. The 90s became a golden age for extraterrestrial intrigue, with shows like The X-Files weaving Roswell-esque conspiracies into their DNA. Agent Mulder's infamous poster, "I Want to Believe," might as well have been a rallying cry for an entire generation raised on stories of hidden hangars and alien autopsies. Blockbuster films took it further. Independence Day's Area 51 scenes, complete with shadowy officials and reverse-engineered alien tech, felt ripped straight from Roswell lore. Even children's cartoons couldn't resist Roswell conspiracies, and Dark Skies turned the incident into animated adventure fodder, proving its grip on pop culture spanned age groups. The town itself leaned into the legend, launching the annual Roswell UFO Festival in 1996. Today, it draws thousands of visitors eager to hear lectures from ufologists, marvel at alien-themed parades, and soak in the kitschy charm of a community that turned skepticism into tourism gold. But Roswell's real cultural power lies in how it reshaped our archetype of aliens. Before 1947, extraterrestrials in fiction were often portrayed as noble, otherworldly visitors, think H. G. Wells' Elegant Martians or The Day the Earth Stood Still's philosophical Claudu. Post-Roswell, the gray alien emerged, hairless, big-eyed, eerily fragile. That image didn't come from nowhere. Witness descriptions of the crash's alleged bodies small, with oversized heads and slender limbs filtered into art, movies, and even supposed abductee accounts. By the time Whitley Strieber's Communion hit shelves in 1987, complete with its iconic cover of a gray alien's piercing stare, the template was set. Roswell didn't just inspire stories, it defined the visual language of extraterrestrial life itself. Government conspiracy theories owed just as much to Roswell. The incident became a blueprint for how institutions might hide earth-shattering truths, classified documents, silenced witnesses, shifting narratives. That framework seeped into everything from Men in Black's humor to Stranger Things' Cold War paranoia. Even outside sci-fi, Roswell's DNA is visible in modern conspiracy culture, from moon landing hoaxes to deep state theories. It taught us to question official stories, to read between the lines of redacted reports, to wonder what might be hidden in plain sight. Perhaps most fascinating is how Roswell's legacy splits audiences. For believers, it's a sacred text proof that we're not alone, and that those in power know more than they admit. For skeptics, it's a cautionary tale about how myths evolve, how memory distorts, and how easily we project our fears onto the unknown. Yet both sides can agree on one thing. Roswell transcends the question of what crashed in the desert. It's become a mirror, reflecting our deepest anxieties about technology, secrecy, and the vast, unsettling possibility that we might not be the universe's only players. And in that sense, whether the truth is out there or not, Roswell has already changed the world. Science, at its core, demands evidence repeatable, verifiable, concrete. And when it comes to Roswell, that standard separates speculation from peer-reviewed fact. Astronomers like Neil deGrasse Tyson often point to the staggering improbability of interstellar travel. The nearest star system, Alpha Centauri, sits over 4 light-years away. Even at light speed, an impossible feat with known physics, that's a 4-year journey one way. The energy required, unfathomable. Add to that the silence of SETI decades-long search for extraterrestrial signals, and the case for aliens visiting Roswell starts to fray at the edges. Extraordinary claims, as Carl Sagan famously said, require extraordinary evidence, and for all the eyewitness accounts and blurry photos, not a single gram of Roswell debris has ever been authenticated as extraterrestrial in a lab. Physicists echo this skepticism, dissecting the debris descriptions with cold precision. Those indestructible memory metal beams, a material called nitinol, developed by the military in the 60s, an alloy that remembers its shape when bent. Lightweight yet strong metallic sheets. Modern aerospace alloys like titanium or aluminum composites could match those properties today, let alone in classified 1940s projects. And the hieroglyphic-like symbols. Military equipment has long used coded markings for inventory or assembly, something a rancher like Mac Brazel wouldn't recognize. The principle of Occam's razor cuts hard here. The simplest explanation, a secret military experiment, fits the facts without invoking interstellar travelers. Yet ufologists fire back with their own compelling points. If Roswell was just a balloon, why the extreme secrecy lasting decades? Why were Project Mogul's records for that specific period lost? And why do declassified memos reference disks and non-human entities if there was nothing to hide? Their argument hinges on institutional distrust, the idea that proof exists but is locked away in vaults like the mythical Hangar 18. Some cite the Pentagon's own 2021 admission of unidentified aerial phenomena UFO's tacit validation. If the military now acknowledges objects defying known physics, they argue, why dismiss Roswell as mere misidentification? The divide often comes down to standards of proof. Scientists demand peer-reviewed data. Ufologists rely on testimony and circumstantial patterns. One side sees a lack of evidence, the other sees evidence of a lack of transparency. What makes Roswell unique is how it straddles that line, a mystery where even the skeptics admit the official story feels incomplete. Because while science rightly scoffs at tales of little green men, it can't fully explain the military's frantic response that summer, or why, 77 years later, the debate still burns hotter than the New Mexico sun. Among the more controversial explanations for Roswell is the theory that the wreckage wasn't alien at all, but the remnants of secret Nazi technology, smuggled out of Germany after World War II. This fringe hypothesis hinges on Operation Paperclip, the real-life U.S. program that recruited over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians in the aftermath of the war. Many of these recruits had worked on cutting-edge aerospace projects for the Third Reich, including experimental aircraft like the Horton Ho 229, a jet-powered flying wing with stealth-like radar evasion capabilities. Could something even more advanced, something unrecognizable to 1947 observers, have been recovered from Nazi labs and tested in the New Mexico desert? Proponents of this theory point to documented Nazi experiments with disc-shaped aircraft, stories of the so-called Die Glock, or the Bell, a rumored Nazi weapon shrouded in occult mystique, describe a bell-shaped device said to manipulate gravity or even warp spacetime. While mainstream historians dismiss the Bell as wartime legend, the Nazis did pursue radical propulsion concepts, including rocket scientist Hermann Oberth's work on spinning disc aircraft. Some speculate that these prototypes, combined with America's sudden access to German research, might explain the uncanny materials described at Roswell, especially the memory metal beams that snapped back into shape. After all, German scientists had pioneered exotic alloys during the war, and Paperclip gave the U.S. military both the knowledge and the minds to push those boundaries further. Yet the theory crumbles under scrutiny. Operation Paperclip's scope, while vast, focused on tangible, documented projects like V-2 rockets, not sci-fi flying discs. Declassified records show no evidence of Nazi technology matching the Roswell debris descriptions. Even the Horton flying wing, while revolutionary, bore no resemblance to the classic saucer shape. It was still visibly an aircraft, just without a traditional fuselage. More damningly, the timeline doesn't add up. Paperclip's transfers began in earnest in 1945, leaving just 2 years to design, build, and crash a vehicle so advanced it defied known physics. That's a stretch even for Nazi engineering. What makes the Nazi angle so persistent, though, isn't its plausibility, it's the unsettling grain of truth beneath the myth. The U.S. did recruit former Nazis, some with dark pasts obscured by their scientific value. They did test experimental aircraft in the Southwest, and they absolutely lied about it when convenient. This cocktail of fact and fiction creates fertile ground for conspiracy, allowing sensational claims to piggyback on real history. The Roswell Nazi link thrives not because it's credible, but because it mirrors our discomfort with the moral compromises of the Cold War arms race. If we're willing to forgive war criminals for technological gains, what else might we have justified in the name of national security? In the end, the Nazi hypothesis says less about Roswell and more about how we process the blurred lines of history. It's easier to imagine a hidden Nazi superweapon than to accept that even the darkest chapters of science couldn't produce the otherworldly. But perhaps that's the real allure of Roswell, not the answer, but the endless questions it forces us to ask about power, secrecy, and the price of progress. The credibility of Roswell's witnesses is a tightrope walk between human fallibility and the persistence of truth. Take Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who handled the debris firsthand. For decades, he maintained his account of unearthly materials, even as the military publicly dismissed him. Then there's Walter Haut, the public information officer who signed the original flying disc press release. Before his death in 2005, Haut left a signed affidavit, sealed until after his passing, reaffirming that the wreckage was extraterrestrial and that he'd seen bodies. These aren't the words of men chasing fame. They're the confessions of individuals who carried secrets to the grave, convinced to their final breaths that what they'd witnessed defied explanation. Yet memory is a fragile thing, especially across half a century. Psychologists point to the flashbulb effect, how traumatic or extraordinary events etch themselves into our minds, but details warp over time. Could witnesses have conflated later UFO lore with their original memories? Consider the testimony of Nurse Miriam Bush, who allegedly described autopsies on non-human cadavers. Her account, shared only with family before her sudden death, matches eerily with the gray alien trope that didn't dominate pop culture until the 70s. Did her subconscious borrow imagery from movies or books, or was she recalling something genuine, filtered through decades of cultural noise? The military's treatment of witnesses adds another layer of doubt. Mac Brazel, the rancher who first reported the debris, was detained by authorities for days after coming forward. When he reappeared, his story had changed suddenly. The wreckage was just tin foil and sticks. Was he coerced, threatened, or simply worn down by relentless questioning? Even more telling are the shifts in testimony from military personnel. Sheridan Cavett, the counterintelligence officer who accompanied Marcel to the debris field, initially denied being there at all. Years later, he admitted his presence but insisted it was just a balloon. Why the reluctance, if there was nothing to hide? Why the evasiveness? Then there's the eerie pattern of deathbed confessions. Lt. Colonel Philip Corso, a former Pentagon official, claimed in his memoir the day after Roswell that he'd overseen the reverse engineering of alien technology recovered from the crash. Critics dismissed him as a fabulist until his colleagues confirmed he'd held high-level security clearances. Similarly, in 2011, a retired CAA officer named Chase Brandon alleged that the agency's archives contained a box labeled Roswell, which he described as holding irrefutable proof of extraterrestrial contact. Both men shared these claims only at the ends of their lives, when careers and reputations no longer mattered. Coincidence, or the final unburdening of souls who'd held the truth too long? The flip side, of course, is the very real phenomenon of collective hysteria. The years following Roswell saw a surge in UFO sightings, many bearing striking similarities to the incident. Psychologists call this social contagion, the way extraordinary claims spread, mutate, and gain credibility through repetition. Maybe Roswell was the spark that ignited a global game of telephone, where mundane events became myth through the power of suggestion. After all, cattle mutilations and crop circles were later debunked as hoaxes or natural phenomena. Could Roswell be the granddaddy of them all, a snowballing legend fueled by our hunger for the extraordinary. Yet against this stands the sheer consistency of certain details. Multiple witnesses, interviewed separately over decades, described the debris' uncanny properties, the way it resisted damage, the strange glyphs, the way it remembered its shape. These weren't vague descriptions of lights in the sky. They were tactile, physical observations, and while memory fades, trauma lingers. The son of Major Jesse Marcel Jr. recounted how his father, a decorated war veteran, would wake in the night decades later, haunted by what he'd seen. That kind of visceral reaction isn't easily faked. So where does this leave us, with a collision of human psychology and historical ambiguity? Some witnesses were undoubtedly mistaken, their memories shaped by time and outside influences. Others may have embellished for attention or profit, but at the heart of Roswell's witness accounts lies a kernel of something stubborn, a core of testimonies too consistent, too emotionally raw, to dismiss entirely. Whether they saw a secret experiment, an alien craft, or something else entirely, one thing is clear. They believed, unequivocally, that they'd touched the inexplicable. And in the end, that belief, untouchable by skeptics or debunkers, is what keeps the mystery alive. The Roswell incident might have faded into obscurity if not for one crucial force, the media. In July 1947, the story first broke in local papers like the Roswell Daily Record with a straightforward headline: "ROF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region." Within days, national wires picked it up, but the military's swift retraction claiming it was just a weather balloon killed the story almost as quickly as it began. For decades, Roswell lingered as a regional curiosity, a footnote in UFO folklore, but then came the 70s, a perfect storm of cultural shifts and journalistic thirst that resurrected the case from the dead. The turning point was Stanton Friedman's 1978 interview with Major Jesse Marcel, the intelligence officer who'd handled the debris. Marcel's insistence that the material was not of this earth reignited public fascination, and suddenly, media outlets hungry for Cold War-era secrets pounced. Investigative journalists like the New York Times' Howard Blum dug into declassified documents, while tabloids like the National Enquirer ran sensational covers screaming, "UFO secrets of Roswell finally exposed." The difference in approach was stark. Mainstream outlets framed Roswell as a historical puzzle, scrutinizing military inconsistencies. Tabloids, on the other hand, leaned into extraterrestrial theatrics, alien autopsies, government deathbed confessions, even staged photos of recovered wreckage. This media schism shaped how the world saw Roswell. Responsible reporting kept the debate alive by highlighting legitimate gaps in the official record, missing documents, conflicting testimonies, the military's erratic behavior. But tabloids blurred fact and fantasy, turning the incident into a buffet of sci-fi tropes. The Enquirer's 1989 UFO shock issue claimed top scientists say aliens landed in 1947. A headline light on evidence but heavy on spectacle. By the 90s, Roswell wasn't just news, it was a cottage industry. TV specials like Unsolved Mysteries dramatized witness accounts with eerie reenactments, while shows like Sightings blurred the line between journalism and entertainment. Hollywood's embrace of Roswell further muddied the waters. Films like Roswell in 1994 and Independence Day, 1996, borrowed real witness details but fused them with outright fiction, making it harder to separate myth from history. Even news programs fell into the trap, giving airtime to experts whose credentials were as shaky as their claims. The result, a feedback loop where each retelling amplified the wildest theories, pushing sober analysis to the margins. Yet the media's role wasn't purely exploitative. Investigative work by outlets like the Washington Post and The Guardian forced the Air Force to declassify documents in the 90s, revealing Project Mogul and other secrets. Responsible journalists acted as watchdogs, demanding transparency, but their efforts were often drowned out by the noise of clickbait headlines and alien merch. What's clear is that Roswell's journey from backwater news blip to global icon isn't just about what happened in 1947. It's about how stories evolve when media, culture, and human curiosity collide. The truth, whatever it is, became secondary to the narrative. and in that sense, Roswell is less an extraterrestrial mystery than a mirror reflecting our own obsession with the unknown and the machines that feed it. Declassified documents surrounding Roswell read like a puzzle, with half the pieces missing pages upon pages of heavily redacted memos, reports with entire paragraphs blacked out, and cryptic references to unknown objects that leave more questions than answers. One of the most intriguing releases came in 2011, when the FBI's Digital Vault published a 1947 memo from Dallas Bureau Chief Guy Huddle. The memo describes an informant's claim that 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico, each containing bodies of human shape but only 3 feet tall. The phrasing is clinical, matter of fact, yet the very next line, where the informant's identity or credibility might be assessed, is conspicuously missing. It's this pattern of near revelation followed by abrupt censorship that fuels suspicion. If these were just weather balloons or test dummies, why the relentless redactions 70 years later? The CIA and Air Force have drip-fed documents over decades, each batch carefully sanitized. A 1952 memo from CIA Director Walter Bedell Smith references flying discs as a national security concern, acknowledging they're not imaginary or fictitious. Another, from 1950, discusses the need to debunk UFO sightings to prevent public hysteria, a chilling admission that psychological manipulation was part of the playbook. Yet even these disclosures feel calculated, offering just enough to placate curiosity without revealing anything substantive. The most telling gaps emerge in the military's own internal communications. A recently declassified 1947 Army Air Force's cable from Roswell Army Airfield, for instance, describes the recovery of a disc, but the following 12 lines potentially detailing its origin or content are entirely redacted. What's left is a ghost of a document, its most critical secrets still locked away. Researchers like journalist Annie Jacobson have combed through these files, connecting dots the government prefers to keep scattered. In her book Area 51, Jacobson cites declassified Project Mogul records showing that the balloon train alleged to have crashed at Roswell, flight number 4 wasn't even active in early July 1947. Flight logs place it grounded for repairs during the critical window. This discrepancy, buried in bureaucratic minutiae, suggests the Air Force's 1994 report might have cherry-picked data to fit its narrative. Other investigators highlight the Eisenhower-era burned memo, a partially destroyed 1954 document referencing a MJ-12 committee allegedly overseeing UFO recoveries. The memo's charred edges and missing passages have become a metaphor for the Roswell saga itself, a truth deliberately set aflame. The frustration lies in what these documents refuse to say. Legal battles by groups like the Mutual UFO Network MUFON have pried loose thousands of pages, yet the most tantalizing files remain, classified in the interest of national security. Even when agencies comply with Freedom of Information Act requests, the releases are often incomplete. A 2017 CIA dump included hundreds of UFO-related documents, but nearly every page bore heavy redactions, with some entire pages withheld as exceptionally grave risks to security. This dance of disclosure and concealment leaves researchers parsing not just words, but the voids between them reading the absences as closely as the text. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of these documents isn't what they contain, but how they're framed. The government's posture has shifted over time from outright dismissal in the 1950s to reluctant acknowledgement of unidentified aerial phenomena in recent years. Yet the Roswell files remain stubbornly opaque, their inconsistencies preserved like insects in amber. The result is a paradox. The very act of declassification, meant to foster transparency, often deepens the mystery. Each released page whispers of secrets still guarded, of a story not yet fully told. And so the hunt continues, with historians and ufologists alike sifting through the fragments, knowing that somewhere in those blacked-out lines, the truth about Roswell might still be hiding in plain sight. Roswell's legacy collides head-on with the modern era's most dangerous export, the weaponization of misinformation. In 1947, rumors spread through newspapers and hushed conversations. Today, conspiracy theories rocket across social media at light speed, amplified by algorithms that prioritize outrage over truth. The same psychological forces that turned Roswell into a UFO mecca now fuel movements like QAnon, where vague clues replace tangible evidence and belief hardens into dogma. Both phenomena thrive on a shared recipe. Take a kernel of real secrecy Cold War military experiments in Roswell's case, political corruption in QAnon's, then drown it in layers of speculation until the original truth becomes unrecognizable. The parallels are unnerving. Just as Roswell witnesses were dismissed as kooks or coerced into silence, modern conspiracy theorists frame themselves as martyrs, their disbelief in official narratives worn as a badge of honor. And like the Air Force's shifting stories about weather balloons, today's bad actors exploit government opacity to spin elaborate alternate realities. A key difference: scale. Roswell's myth-making took decades. QAnon's storm fantasy metastasized globally in months, where ufologists pored over declassified documents line by line. Today's conspiracy hunters treat viral tweets as gospel, cherry-picking phrases to fit predetermined narratives. Confirmation bias is the engine powering this chaos, the human tendency to embrace information that aligns with our beliefs while rejecting what doesn't. Roswell offers a masterclass in its dangers. Believers spotlight Jesse Marcel's accounts of unearthly debris, but ignore his son's admission that some memories may have blurred over time. Skeptics cling to Project Mogul's paper trail, while dismissing the dozen military witnesses who swore under oath that the debris defied physics. Both sides claim to seek truth, yet often fall into the same trap, treating evidence like a buffet, loading their plates only with what looks appealing. The digital age has turned this bias into a crisis. YouTube rabbit holes autoplay Roswell documentaries interspersed with flat Earth rants, normalizing the leap from "governments lie" to "every lie must hide aliens." Twitter threads dissect redacted memos alongside election fraud fan fiction, blending legitimate skepticism with paranoia. The result: a world where Roswell isn't just a historical mystery, it's a cautionary tale about how easily ambiguity curdles into extremism when mixed with unchecked credulity. Breaking this cycle demands intellectual humility. It means sitting with discomfort when evidence contradicts our desires, whether that's admitting Mogul explains some debris but not all witness accounts, or acknowledging that governments can hide mundane secrets without orchestrating interstellar cover-ups. Roswell teaches us that the loudest voices often drown out new ones, and the truth usually lies not in the shadows between black and white, but in the gray expanse where questions still outnumber answers. In an era drowning in disinformation, that gray space is the only terrain where honest seekers can still plant their feet. Roswell wasn't just an American obsession, it sent shockwaves through the halls of global power, shaping how nations approached UFO secrecy and propaganda. The Soviet Union, America's Cold War rival, seized on Roswell as both a psychological weapon and a genuine security concern. Declassified KGB files reveal a frantic push to decipher whether the U.S. had recovered advanced technology or, worse, made contact with a non-human intelligence. Soviet scientists were ordered to analyze every scrap of UFO intelligence, not out of curiosity, but fear. If the Americans had unlocked extraterrestrial secrets, the balance of power could tip overnight. State-run newspapers like Pravda spun Roswell as proof of capitalist deception, mocking U.S. explanations while quietly funding their own UFO research programs. The irony: while publicly dismissing UFOs as capitalist hysteria, the Kremlin secretly tracked sightings across Siberia, worried they might be undiscovered American aircraft. France took a radically different approach. In 1977, decades before the Pentagon's UAP task force, the French government established JPAN, a branch of their space agency devoted to investigating UFO reports. Unlike the US's culture of denial, JPAN operated transparently, publishing detailed case files online. Their findings were pragmatic. Most sightings had earthly explanations, but a stubborn percentage defied conventional analysis. When asked about Roswell, JPAN scientists avoided definitive claims, but noted the incident's inconsistencies mirrored patterns in their own unresolved cases. This openness reflected France's broader philosophy, treating UFOs as a scientific puzzle rather than a national security threat. Britain's Ministry of Defense, by contrast, danced between skepticism and clandestine interest. Declassified files from their UFO desk show officials privately debated Roswell's implications as early as the 1950s. One memo speculated the incident might be a U.S. test of psychoactive disinformation, a staged event to unsettle adversaries. Yet by the 90s, Britain's tone shifted. A 1995 briefing prepared for Prime Minister John Major acknowledged that while most UFOs were misidentifications, a small number exhibited unusual flight characteristics. The document made no direct mention of Roswell, but its existence hinted at quiet, high-level unease. Elsewhere, reactions ranged from intrigue to indifference. China's state media historically ignored Roswell, framing UFOs as distractions from scientific progress until 2010, when a surge of sightings over airports forced the PLA to establish a secretive UAP task force. Brazilian officials, meanwhile, openly speculated that Roswell might connect to their own infamous Varginha incident of 1996, where military personnel allegedly captured strange beings. Even the Vatican weighed in indirectly. Jesuit astronomer Father José Gabriel Funes declared in 2008 that belief in extraterrestrial life doesn't contradict Catholic faith, a statement some interpreted as tacit acknowledgement of cases like Roswell. What emerges is a global tapestry of fascination and fear. For some nations, Roswell became a mirror reflecting their own anxieties about technology, secrecy, or humanity's place in the cosmos. For others, it was a cautionary tale in how not to handle the unexplained. The starkest lesson lies in the divide between nations that met UFOs with open inquiry and those that buried them under layers of classification. That split between curiosity and containment might explain why, decades later, Roswell remains less a solved mystery than a Rorschach test for how we confront the unknown. Among the most baffling aspects of the Roswell incident are the first-hand accounts of the debris itself, materials so unusual they seem to defy the known science of the era. Multiple witnesses described fragments with uncanny properties, paper-thin metallic sheets that couldn't be cut, bent, or burned, lightweight beams etched with strange symbols, and perhaps most puzzling of all, pieces that would return to their original shape after being crumpled, like some kind of memory metal. These descriptions don't just sound alien, they sound impossible for 1947. But were they? The idea of memory metal isn't science fiction. Today, we know it as nitinol, a nickel-titanium alloy developed by the U.S. Navy in the early 1960s. When heated, nitinol remembers its preformed shape, snapping back like the beams described at Roswell. Skeptics argue this proves the debris could have been an early, classified version of such material, a secret military project misidentified as extraterrestrial. After all, the Cold War was a hotbed of aerospace innovation, and Roswell Army Airfield was home to the only nuclear bomber squadron in the world at the time. It's plausible they were testing exotic alloys for high-altitude reconnaissance or even early stealth technology. But there's a hitch. While nitinol fits the memory metal description, its development timeline doesn't align neatly with Roswell. The alloy wasn't officially discovered until 1959, over a decade after the incident. Could a prototype have existed in secret? Possibly, but no declassified documents or credible leaks support this. Even more confounding are the other material descriptions. Metallic foils so durable they resisted sledgehammers, yet light enough to float momentarily in the air. Modern materials like graphene or titanium composites might match some of these traits, but in 1947, the closest analogs would have been German wartime experiments with lightweight alloys, yet nothing in recovered Nazi archives resembles the Roswell debris. Then there's the matter of the hieroglyphic-like symbols. Some researchers suggest these could have been inventory markings or assembly codes from a classified project, perhaps even Cyrillic or other non-Latin scripts, if the debris was Soviet spy tech. But witnesses like Jesse Marcel, trained in aircraft identification, insisted the markings were unlike any earthly language. Intriguingly, similar symbols later appeared in unrelated UFO cases, like the 1964 Lonnie Zamora sighting. where a New Mexico policeman reported a landed craft adorned with cryptic red insignia. Coincidence, hoaxers borrowing from Roswell lore, or something more? The military's own behavior adds another layer of mystery. If this was merely experimental technology, why the extreme secrecy lasting decades? High-altitude balloons like Mogul were classified, yes, but their existence was acknowledged once the Cold War ended. Why keep insisting Roswell was a mundane weather balloon when even internal memos referenced disks and unknown materials? Unless, of course, the debris was so advanced, so unlike anything recognizable, that admitting its existence would raise uncomfortable questions about who or what created it. This leaves us with a paradox. The Roswell debris matches no known technology of its time, yet it also doesn't cleanly fit the extraterrestrial hypothesis. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, a secretive branch of human ingenuity pushing boundaries we still don't fully understand, or something even more profound, a collision of our world with a technology so advanced it blurred the line between terrestrial and cosmic. Whatever the case, one thing is certain: the materials described at Roswell weren't just unusual. They were, by every account, revolutionary, and that fact alone ensures this mystery will endure for generations to come. In the shadowy corridors of UFO lore, few documents have sparked as much debate as the so-called Majestic 12 papers, alleged top-secret briefing materials outlining a clandestine group formed to handle extraterrestrial encounters. The story begins in 1984, when a roll of undeveloped film arrived anonymously at the home of Hollywood producer James Shandera. When developed, it revealed pages stamped Top Secret Majestic 12, appearing to be a 1952 briefing prepared for President-elect Dwight D. Eisenhower. The documents described a covert committee of 12 scientists, military leaders, and intelligence officials allegedly established by President Truman after the Roswell crash to oversee the recovery and study of alien technology. Among the named members were familiar power players like Vannevar Bush, the architect of America's wartime scientific programs, and Roswell Army Airfield Commander General Roger Ramey. At first glance, the MJ-12 papers seemed like the smoking gun UFO researchers had waited decades for official confirmation that the government not only knew about extraterrestrials, but had actively concealed their existence. The documents were meticulous, filled with precise jargon, classification markings, and references to real operations. They even included a memo from Truman authorizing the group's formation, complete with a signature that bore a striking resemblance to the president's handwriting. For believers, this was irrefutable proof. Here, at last, was the paper trail connecting Roswell to a vast, decades-long cover-up, but skepticism arrived just as swiftly. Forensic linguists noted inconsistencies in the language. Phrases like interplanetary spacecraft were oddly modern for 1950s military jargon. Typeface analysis raised red flags. The font matched a Smith Corona typewriter not manufactured until the 1960s. Even the Eisenhower briefing's date seemed suspicious: December 18, 1952, just weeks before his inauguration, an unlikely moment for such a sensitive handover. Critics pointed to the document's convenient provenance, too. They hadn't been discovered in an archive or through a whistleblower, but arrived via an untraceable film roll, making authentication impossible. The debate reached a boiling point when researcher Philip Klass uncovered a glaring error. One MJ-12 memo referenced the Operation Majestic 12 codename, yet declassified records showed Majestic wasn't used in U.S. classification systems until the 1960s. This anachronism, Klass argued, was the hallmark of a hoax. Then came the handwriting experts. While Truman's signature initially seemed convincing, specialists noted subtle deviations from his known samples, a slight wobble in the downstroke, an unnatural spacing between letters. The evidence suggested a skilled forgery, not presidential penmanship, yet the allure of MJ-12 persists, even among some mainstream researchers. Stanton Friedman, the nuclear physicist turned ufologist, spent years defending the documents, arguing that while some copies might be fakes, others contained verifiable details only insiders would know. He highlighted references to obscure projects like Operation Majestic, which matched real but little-known Cold War programs. Even skeptics admit the forgeries are sophisticated, crafted by someone with deep knowledge of military history and bureaucracy. That sophistication fuels speculation. Were the MJ-12 papers a disinformation campaign meant to muddy the waters around real UFO secrets, or an elaborate prank that took on a life of its own? The truth may never be settled. What's undeniable is how the MJ-12 mythos has shaped UFO culture. These papers, real or not, became a blueprint for conspiracy theories, proof that the public could no longer trust official narratives. They inspired everything from the X-Files to modern Pentagon UAP task forces, embedding the idea of a shadowy cabal controlling alien truths. In the end, whether the documents are authentic matters less than what they represent, our collective hunger for answers, and the lengths we'll go to find them, even if it means believing in ghosts on paper. Human minds are wired to seek patterns, to fill in the blanks with meaning, especially when faced with the unexplainable. This instinct, known as pareidolia, is why we see faces in clouds or religious figures in burnt toast. At Roswell, it explains how ordinary debris scattered across a ranch under the harsh New Mexico sun could morph into something extraordinary. When Mac Brazel first stumbled upon those strange fragments, his brain wasn't processing neutral data. It was wrestling with the aftermath of a world still reeling from the atomic age. The summer of 1947 wasn't just any July. It was a moment when humanity had already glimpsed the unthinkable Hiroshima's mushroom cloud, the V-2 rockets raining on London. The idea that something even more unimaginable might crash from the skies didn't feel like science fiction. It felt like the next logical terror. The Cold War amplified this existential dread. As tensions with the Soviet Union escalated, trust in institutions eroded. The same government that lied about nuclear tests or covert operations might easily conceal an otherworldly visitation. Roswell became a canvas for these anxieties, a way to articulate fears too vast for words. Psychologists call this epiphania, the tendency to perceive connections between unrelated events. A crashed balloon wasn't just a balloon. It was a thread in a larger tapestry of deception, a symbol of all the truth hidden behind classified stamps and closed doors. Trauma, too, reshapes memory. Witnesses like Jesse Marcel weren't just recalling debris, they were reliving an event filtered through decades of cultural osmosis. Studies show that dramatic experiences, especially those tied to historical crises, become susceptible to narrative creep. Over time, the mind folds in details from movies, books, or even conversations, blending fact and fiction until the two are indistinguishable. Marcel's son recalled his father bringing home wreckage with hieroglyphics, but could those symbols have been influenced by the flying saucer fever of the 50s? The same process might explain why descriptions of alien bodies grew more detailed as Hollywood's gray aliens colonized the collective consciousness. Then there's the comfort of conspiracy. For some, believing in a Roswell cover-up isn't about evidence, it's about restoring a sense of control. If shadowy elites are hiding extraterrestrial contact, at least someone's at the wheel. This agency detection bias hardwires us to prefer intentional explanations over chaos. A weather balloon mishap is random, unsettling in its banality. But a government hiding interstellar secrets, that's a story with villains, heroes, and a plot that might, someday, be resolved. Roswell's endurance isn't just about what crashed in the desert. It's about how human brains confront the unknown, filling silence with whispers and shadows with monsters. The irony is stark. The very mental shortcuts that helped our ancestors survive predators now trap us in labyrinths of our own making. Whether alien or alloy, the wreckage at Roswell became a mirror, reflecting back not just what we fear might be out there, but what we know lives within us. Roswell's transformation from a sleepy New Mexico town to the self-proclaimed UFO capital of the world is a masterclass in turning myth into economic gold. What began as whispers in the desert has become a full-blown industry, with alien-themed shops, neon green street lamps shaped like flying saucers, and even a McDonald's built in the silhouette of a UFO. At the heart of it all stands the International UFO Museum and Research Center, a sprawling tribute to the 1947 incident that draws over 200,000 visitors annually. Inside, life-size dioramas of gray aliens share space with declassified government documents, while gift shops hawk t-shirts declaring, "I believe," in bold, extraterrestrial-friendly fonts. For many tourists, this kitschy celebration is the main attraction, a chance to lean into the lore without worrying about credibility. But behind the plastic aliens and souvenir mugs lies a more nuanced reality. Talk to locals, and you'll hear a mix of pride and exasperation. Sarah Martinez, a third-generation Roswell resident who runs a cafe near the museum, describes the town's love-hate relationship with its fame. "Tourism pays the bills, but sometimes I miss when we were just known for dairy farms," she admits, wiping down a counter adorned with little green men. "You get tired of explaining to outsiders that no, we don't actually get UFO sightings every weekend." Yet even skeptics acknowledge the economic lifeline the legend provides. When oil and gas jobs dried up in the 90s, Roswell's UFO identity kept hotels and restaurants afloat. Annual events like the Roswell UFO Festival, which features costume contests, expert panels, and a downtown alien parade, now inject millions into the local economy. The town's embrace of its otherworldly reputation took a deliberate turn in the 21st century. In 2017, the City Council greenlit a $5 million renovation of the UFO Museum, rebranding it as a world-class research hub to attract a more academic crowd. The move reflects a growing push to balance spectacle with substance. Recent partnerships with organizations like the Mutual UFO Network have brought serious investigators to Roswell, scouring declassified files and interviewing aging witnesses before their stories fade. Even the local university has gotten involved, offering summer seminars on exoarchaeology and the psychology of belief. Yet the tension between commercialism and credibility persists. Storefronts selling alien plush toys sit just blocks from newly opened, serious UFO research centers, where scientists quietly analyze radar data and materials purportedly linked to the crash. Some locals, like retired schoolteacher Jim O'Brien, see this duality as Roswell's strength. "We're like Area 51 with a sense of humor," he chuckles. You can buy an alien bobblehead for your kid, then walk down the street and hear a physicist debate interstellar travel. Where else does that happen? What's clear is that Roswell's survival depends on walking this tightrope, honoring the myth that put it on the map while proving it's more than just a roadside attraction. The town's latest gamble, a proposed Spaceport Roswell initiative, aiming to capitalize on the growing commercial space industry by positioning itself as a hub for aerospace innovation, with a cheeky nod to its UFO roots. Whether this next chapter lifts Roswell into the stratosphere or crashes back to Earth remains to be seen. But one thing's certain, after 75 years, the world still can't look away. The whispers surrounding Roswell didn't fade with the witnesses of 1947. They found new voices in modern military whistleblowers who claim the truth is still locked away behind classified doors. Among the most controversial is Bob Lazar, a self-proclaimed former physicist who in the late 1980s alleged he'd worked on reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology at a secret site near Area 51. Lazar's story was explosive. He described 9 alien craft stored in a hangar, powered by an unearthly element he called Element 115, which defied known physics. His claims, though riddled with inconsistencies, his academic credentials couldn't be verified, and his employment records remained disputed, ignited a firestorm. What made Lazar resonate wasn't just his technical jargon, but his demeanor. Unlike the wild-eyed conspiracy theorists of pop culture, he spoke with calm precision, describing alien reactors and gravity propulsion systems in a way that sounded eerily plausible to a generation raised on Star Trek. Yet Lazar is just one thread in a larger tapestry of modern whistleblowers. In 2021, former Army Colonel Carl Nell came forward with claims about a secret Pentagon program studying non-human materials recovered from UFO crashes, remarks that echoed earlier leaks from intelligence official Luis Elizondo, who led the Pentagon's now declassified UAP task force. Neither named Roswell directly, but their language phrases like legacy programs and exotic retrievals fueled speculation that the 1947 incident might have been the first domino in a decades-long cover-up. Even more startling was the testimony of David Grush, a former Air Force intelligence officer who in 2023 told Congress under oath that the U.S. government possessed intact and partially intact alien vehicles, recovered from crash retrievals he compared to Roswell. What makes these accounts so compelling isn't just their sensational claims, it's the paradox of their credibility. Many of these figures, like Elizondo, held high-level security clearances. Their language is measured, their risks tangible. Grush, for instance, claimed he faced retaliation for coming forward, and his disclosures were vetted by the Pentagon's own review process before reaching Congress. Yet for all their gravity, the proof remains elusive. No whistleblower has produced irrefutable documents or physical evidence. The closest we've come are heavily redacted files, and the Pentagon's own begrudging admission that some UAPs exhibit unexplained characteristics. This raises a deeper question. Why do these stories persist, even in the absence of hard evidence? Part of it is psychology. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, and the idea that a secret coterie of insiders holds cosmic truths taps into a primal narrative, the hero revealing forbidden knowledge. There's also the trust gap between institutions and the public. In an era where governments lie about wars, surveillance, and pandemics, dismissing whistleblowers as mere fabulists feels naive to many. Roswell serves as the original sin in this narrative. The moment the public learned authorities might hide the unimaginable. Modern whistleblowers, whether truthful or not, are simply the latest inheritors of that legacy. But context matters. The Cold War birthed a shadow industry of disinformation, where intelligence agencies routinely fed false UFO stories to distract from classified aircraft tests. Could figures like Lazar be unwitting pawns in that tradition, or are they genuine truth-tellers, risking everything to expose what they believe is humanity's most profound secret? The answer likely lies somewhere in the murky middle, a mix of real secrecy, personal conviction, and the eternal human hunger for mysteries that promise to rewrite reality. What's undeniable is that Roswell, whether by accident or design, became the genesis of a modern mythos, one where the line between whistleblower and prophet is as hazy as a desert mirage. The extraterrestrial hypothesis, often called ETH, has been the cornerstone of Roswell's mythology for decades. At its core, it's a straightforward proposition. The wreckage recovered in 1947 wasn't from this world. Proponents point to the sheer consistency of witness accounts, ranchers, soldiers, even trained pilots describing materials that defied known science. The infamous memory metal beams, the strange hieroglyphic markings, and most compellingly, the repeated descriptions of small, non-human bodies. These testimonies, often given independently by individuals with no motive to lie, share eerie overlaps. Former intelligence officer Jesse Marcel's insistence that the debris wasn't of this Earth carries weight precisely because he had top-level clearance to identify foreign aircraft. Even skeptics admit, if you take these accounts at face value, ETH is the simplest explanation, but simplicity isn't proof. The glaring hole in ETH remains the absence of physical evidence. Not a single shred of the Roswell debris has ever been authenticated as extraterrestrial in a lab setting. The military's confiscation of materials, whether to hide alien tech or Cold War experiments, means we're left with second-hand descriptions, not analyzable samples. Even the alien bodies suffer from this evidentiary gap. While witnesses like mortician Glenn Dennis spoke of small, fragile cadavers with oversized heads, no biological evidence has surfaced, no tissue samples, no DNA, no autopsy records. In a case where secrecy is the only constant, absence of proof isn't proof of absence, but it's a hurdle ETH can't ignore. This evidentiary void has given rise to alternative theories, some even wilder than ETH. The interdimensional hypothesis suggests Roswell's craft wasn't from another planet, but another reality, a tear in the fabric of spacetime that allowed something through. Proponents argue this could explain why the debris seemed to defy physics. If the craft operated under entirely different dimensional rules, its materials might appear alien simply because they functioned outside our laws of nature. There's a curious symmetry here with modern theoretical physics, where concepts like string theory propose hidden dimensions beyond our perception. Then there's the time travel angle. What if Roswell's crash wasn't extraterrestrial but extratemporal? Some theorists posit the craft was a human-made vessel from the far future. Its technology so advanced it appeared otherworldly to 1947 observers. This idea taps into real scientific debates about time's arrow, whether backward time travel, while improbable, might be mathematically possible. It also sidesteps ETH's Fermi paradox problem. If alien civilizations exist, why haven't we found broader evidence? But like ETH, these theories suffer from a lack of tangible evidence. They're thought experiments, not conclusions. The strength of ETH lies in its cultural resonance. It aligns with humanity's oldest question, are we alone? The weakness, it demands faith in a universe where aliens not only exist, but visited us, then vanished without leaving a trace beyond folklore. Interdimensional and time travel theories, while creative, stretch plausibility further. Yet Roswell's enduring mystery thrives in these gray zones, where every answer raises new questions. Perhaps the truth isn't just hidden, it's something we're not yet equipped to understand. Roswell reveals something fundamental about the human spirit, our relentless drive to make sense of the inexplicable. Long before saucers crashed in the desert, ancient cultures spun stories of gods descending in fiery chariots, of celestial beings imparting forbidden knowledge. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, the Vimanas of Hindu texts, even medieval paintings of strange lights in the sky, these aren't just folklore. They're proof that when faced with the unexplainable, we've always reached for narratives that bridge the gap between the known and the unimaginable. Roswell fits neatly into this lineage, a modern myth for the atomic age. What changes isn't our curiosity, but the framework we use to interpret it. Where our ancestors saw omens or divine messengers, we project sleek metal and gray aliens, a reflection of our own technological anxieties. This longing for answers exposes the limits of modern science. For all our advances, we still inhabit a universe where 95% of matter is unaccounted for, where quantum particles defy logic, and distant exoplanets hint at possibilities beyond our grasp. Roswell crystallizes this tension between our hunger for discovery and the frustrating reality that some mysteries resist tidy explanations. Scientists rightly demand evidence, yet the incident's murkiness thrives in those very gaps. The debris was confiscated, witnesses were silenced, official stories shifted. In the absence of concrete proof, the void fills with speculation, proving that skepticism and wonder aren't opposites, they're two sides of the same coin, spinning endlessly in the desert wind. But strip away the aliens, and Roswell's real legacy is a crisis of trust. The military's botched handling, first claiming a flying disc, then retracting it, then offering ever-changing explanations, didn't just fuel conspiracy theories. It became a blueprint for institutional distrust. In an era when governments lied about everything from Vietnam to Watergate, Roswell taught the public to question official narratives. Today, that skepticism has curdled into something darker, a world where flat earthers and vaccine deniers cite the same cover-up playbook. The irony is stark. An incident that might have been a simple accident morphed into a symbol of systemic deception, not because of what crashed, but because of how those in power responded. Roswell endures not as evidence of extraterrestrials, but as a mirror. It reflects our hopes that we're not alone, that the universe holds wonders beyond our comprehension. It echoes our fears of being lied to, of technologies we can't control. And most of all, it underscores a truth as old as civilization. The unknown will always terrify and exhilarate us in equal measure. Whether the truth is out there or not, the story we've built around it tells us far more about ourselves than about any visitors from the stars. The quest to unravel Roswell's secrets is far from over. In fact, the next chapter might be the most revealing yet, thanks to cutting-edge technology and a new wave of investigative projects poised to re-examine the incident with fresh eyes. Upcoming documentaries like Roswell, The New Evidence, set to premiere later this year, promise to showcase never-before-seen witness testimonies and enhanced analysis of archival footage using AI upscaling tools that can sharpen blurry 1940s film into startling clarity. Meanwhile, publishers are teasing a bombshell book by aerospace historian Dr. Lillian Carter, who claims to have uncovered classified memos linking Roswell to a shadowy post-war research initiative called Project Silver Sky, a program allegedly focused on reverse engineering unconventional propulsion systems. Whether these claims hold water remains to be seen, but one thing's certain: the appetite for answers has never been stronger. What makes this era of Roswell research uniquely promising is the arsenal of modern tools now at investigators' disposal. Artificial intelligence is being deployed to cross-reference decades of declassified documents, flagging inconsistencies or patterns humans might miss. Advanced radar analysis, originally developed for weather forecasting, is being repurposed to re-examine atmospheric data from that fateful July night in 1947, searching for anomalies that could explain the reported aerial phenomena. Even materials science is getting in on the action. Researchers at MIT recently announced a technique called nanoscale isotopic tracing, capable of determining the origin of metallic fragments down to atomic-level signatures. If even a sliver of the original Roswell debris still exists in some forgotten government vault, this technology could finally settle the debate over whether it's earthly or extraterrestrial. Yet for all the excitement, a healthy dose of skepticism remains essential. The same tools that could crack the case wide open also make it easier than ever to fabricate convincing hoaxes. Deepfake technology can animate historical figures like General Ramey to confirm wild theories, while generative AI might churn out plausible but fake documents laden with period-accurate jargon. Even well-intentioned researchers can fall prey to confirmation bias, interpreting ambiguous data as proof of their preferred narrative. That's why initiatives like the Roswell Scientific Review Panel, a coalition of physicists, historians, and forensic experts, are urging transparency, demanding that any new claims undergo peer scrutiny before hitting the airwaves. The most promising development, though, isn't technological, it's cultural. After decades of dismissal, mainstream science is finally engaging with UFO phenomena under the rebranded term UAP, Unidentified Anomalous Phenomena. NASA, a 2023 independent study team, and the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office represent a seismic shift. Once fringe topics are now getting serious funding and institutional attention. This new openness raises the tantalizing possibility that Roswell, long relegated to the realm of conspiracy, might yet be reevaluated through a rigorous academic lens. Imagine a future where spectral imaging uncovers erased text in old military logs, or where breakthroughs in quantum physics finally explain those impossible material properties witnesses described. For viewers captivated by the mystery, the takeaway isn't to blindly embrace every new claim, but to stay curious, ask tough questions, and demand evidence. The truth about Roswell, if it's out there, won't be found in viral headlines or slick documentaries alone. It'll emerge from the painstaking work of scientists sifting data, historians piecing together fragmented records, and ordinary people keeping the pressure on institutions to come clean. Because whether the answer turns out to be aliens, experimental tech, or something stranger still, one principle remains timeless: the pursuit of truth matters more than the comfort of certainty. And in that pursuit, Roswell isn't just a relic of the past, it's a beacon for the future. 75 years after that fiery summer night in New Mexico, Roswell remains the grand paradox of UFO lore, a case where every answer seems to raise three new questions. On one hand, we have the Air Force's meticulous 1990s reports, attributing the debris to Project Mogul's spy balloons and dismissing alien bodies as mistaken memories of crash test dummies. The logic is solid. Classified projects explain the secrecy, Cold War tensions justify the cover-up, and human psychology accounts for the wilder claims. Yet something still doesn't sit right. Why did so many trained observers, military personnel, ranchers, even a mortician, insist until their dying breaths that what they saw defied earthly explanation? Why does the government's timeline of events keep shifting, even now? Dig deeper, and the contradictions multiply. The same declassified documents that debunk extraterrestrial theories also reveal startling admissions, memos referencing non-human entities, reports of materials with unusual properties, and a paper trail of redactions that feels less like bureaucracy and more like deliberate obfuscation. Even skeptics concede, if Roswell was merely a balloon mishap, why the relentless secrecy spanning generations? Why confiscate every scrap of debris from civilians under armed guard? These aren't the actions of a military cleaning up a routine accident. They're the hallmarks of an institution guarding something extraordinary, whether alien or otherwise. What makes Roswell endlessly fascinating isn't the certainty it offers, but the ambiguity it refuses to surrender. For every credible scientist pointing to nitinol as the memory metal witnesses described, there's a materials engineer noting the alloy wasn't invented until 12 years later. For every historian citing social contagion to explain alien body accounts, there's a psychologist countering that trauma sharpens, not distorts, a witness recall. This push and pull between fact and folklore is the incident's true legacy. It's a Rorschach test for our age, revealing whether we default to institutional trust or instinctual suspicion, whether we see order in chaos or chaos in order. Perhaps the most profound lesson of Roswell isn't about UFOs at all, but about human nature itself. We're pattern-seeking creatures, desperate to weave narratives from fragments. The rancher's crumpled foil becomes alien alloy. The weather balloon transforms into an interstellar craft. Even the government's clumsy secrecy feels intentional, because the alternative, that truth can be as mundane as bureaucratic incompetence, is somehow less satisfying than cosmic conspiracy. So where does that leave us? With a mystery that's equal parts history and mythology, a story that's grown bigger than whatever actually crashed in the desert. Whether the truth involves visitors from the stars or shadows of our own making, one thing's undeniable. Roswell endures because it scratches an itch deeper than curiosity. It's a reminder that the universe, or at least our corner of it, still holds secrets just beyond our grasp. And as long as those secrets linger, so too will the whispers of what really happened on that lonely New Mexico ranch, and why, after all this time, the full story still feels just